Christmas Eve, the one day where forced cheerfulness becomes a competitive sport, and I was losing. The air outside was sharp, but inside this fluorescent cathedral of consumerism, the heat was suffocating. A chaotic symphony of squeaking carts and the incessant jingle of manufactured joy. I navigated the aisles like a ghost, my small basket a stark contrast to the overflowing mountains of food and gifts. I wasn't here for cheer. I was here for milk, bread, and the solitude of my quiet apartment. The holiday had lost its magic, replaced by a hollow ritual I performed purely out of habit. It's a performance. A grand, tinsel-draped play where everyone knows their lines about peace on earth, yet they'll still cut you off for a parking spot. I'd seen it all. The strained smiles, the frantic energy, the desperate attempt to purchase a feeling that can't be bought. My cynicism was a comfortable coat, shielding me from the cold of it all. I didn't hate people. I hated the pretense. This one-day-a-year kindness felt like an obligation, not an impulse. So I kept my head down, another anonymous face in a sea of performative happiness, just trying to get through it. Finally, the checkout line, my final hurdle. I placed my meager items on the conveyor belt, a testament to my solitary plans. The cashier, a young woman with exhaustion in her eyes but a practiced smile, was on autopilot. "Merry Christmas." Beep. It was in this monotony that I first noticed him. The man in front of me. He wasn't part of the frantic holiday rush. There was a stillness about him, a quiet that seemed to absorb the noise. He wore a thin, worn coat, his shoulders slumped with a weight far heavier than the groceries moving toward the scanner, a bubble of stark reality in an ocean of tinsel. His items were humble: milk, a loaf of bread, potatoes, and a small chicken. Not a single toy, not one festive indulgence. This was a meal of necessity. The total flashed on the screen. The man swiped his card. A harsh, negative beep cut through the air. He tried again. Same sound. A flush of red crept up his neck as he fumbled in his pockets, a desperate search for cash he knew wasn't there. The cashier's smile tightened. The woman behind me sighed impatiently. The fragile illusion of holiday cheer began to crack under the weight of one brutal fact. He couldn't pay. My first instinct, honed by years of self-preservation, was to look away, stare at the tabloid headlines, pretend this wasn't happening. It was his problem, not mine. But I couldn't. I watched as his hand, trembling slightly, reached out to push the milk back. He mumbled an apology, his voice nearly swallowed by the store's noise. In that moment, the deafening chorus of fake cheer went silent for me. All I could hear was the soft scrape of that carton on the scanner. It was the sound of defeat. That sound shattered my armor. It was a spark in the cold, and I knew I couldn't just stand there and watch it go out. I hesitated, a silent debate raging within me before stepping forward. "Is everything all right?" The question was quiet. He flinched, turning with the startled look of a man caught in profound shame. His eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, refused to meet mine. "I'm fine," he mumbled, his voice a dry rasp, but his hands trembled as he returned milk to his cart. The lie was a fragile thing between us. My own cynicism, a familiar armor, whispered warnings of a well-rehearsed holiday scam. Yet, the slump of his shoulders, the sheer weight of his defeat, felt too genuine to be an act. He looked up, and his vulnerability was a physical blow. "I'm not looking for a handout," he began, his voice cracking. "I lost my construction job last month. I thought our savings would be enough. But then the furnace died." He gestured feebly toward the meager collection in his cart, a small chicken, some potatoes. "My little girl, she's 7. She didn't ask for a toy. She just asked if we could have a fancy dinner like we used to." He wasn't pleading. He was simply stating the facts of a life that had capsized, the confession of a father who had broken a promise. Every cynical instinct I possessed screamed in protest. I'd heard variations of this story before, usually followed by a request for cash. The lost job, the expense, the child's wish, a trifecta of sympathy. I remembered the bitterness of being played for a fool. My mind became a prosecutor, cross-examining his appearance for tells. Was his coat too new? I was searching for the flaw that would justify my walking away. It's so much easier to believe in a liar than to confront the reality of a good man's suffering. He must have read the doubt on my face, because his gaze dropped to a box of hot chocolate. "My boy," he whispered, "is 10. He loves marshmallows in his cocoa, calls them sugar clouds. My wife told him we couldn't get any this week. He didn't complain. He just looked at me and said, 'That's okay, Dad. Maybe Santa will bring some.'" That was it. That was the detail that shattered my defenses. Not the grand tragedy, but the tiny, heartbreaking image of a boy outsourcing his hope for marshmallows to Santa. It was too pure, too painful to be a lie. My cynicism simply disintegrated. The world narrowed. The beeping registers and tinny Christmas music all faded away. There was only the quiet dignity of this father and his impossible promise. I didn't think. I acted. Stepping forward, I placed a hand on his cart and met the cashier's curious gaze. "Ring it all up," I said, my voice steady. "Everything, and add a bag of the biggest marshmallows you've got." The man turned, his mouth agape, his eyes glistening with a disbelief that mirrored my own. The weight of his empty cart vanished, replaced by a connection that made my own cart feel profoundly and utterly meaningless. "I'll get it." The words felt foreign, cutting through the checkout's hum. The cashier's hand stopped, her eyes flicking between us, searching for a joke that wasn't there. The man remained perfectly still, a statue of defeated pride, as if my offer was a frequency he couldn't process. I stepped forward, pulling out my card. The simple piece of plastic felt impossibly heavy, not with value, but with the weight of another man's dignity. I wasn't just buying groceries, I was crossing an invisible line, and the resulting silence was more profound than any noise in the entire store. He finally turned, and what I saw wasn't just gratitude. It was more visceral. It was a dam breaking after holding back a lifetime of desperation. His face, a roadmap of hardship, seemed to crumble. His jaw worked, but no words came. A single tear carved a path down his cheek before he swiped it away with a rough hand, angry at his own body's betrayal. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. His eyes communicated a relief so profound it felt like a physical force, the silent gasp of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to breathe. The transaction was surreal, a blur of mundane beeps against a backdrop of intense human drama. The cashier, her apathy replaced by a wide-eyed solemnity, bagged the items with a newfound care, as if handling sacred artifacts. I tapped my card, the number on the screen a meaningless blur. My focus was on the man as he watched the milk, bread, and small chicken go into the bags. To him, this wasn't food. It was a ceasefire in a long war. It was permission to have one night of peace, a brief connection to a world he felt exiled from. With the bags in his hands, a new energy flowed through him. He found his voice, a ragged, broken whisper. I can't, he stammered, shaking his head. He turned to go, then paused, reaching into his worn jacket. He pulled out a small, crudely carved wooden bird, its edges smoothed from years of being held. He pressed it into my hand, his calloused fingers a fleeting, cold touch. "He'll like this," he said, his voice thick. Before I could ask who he was, the man was gone, swallowed by the crowd, moving with the haste of someone who had just stolen back a piece of his life. I stood there as the next customer's items began their journey down the belt. The store snapped back into focus, loud and indifferent, but I was adrift in the quiet wake of his departure. In my palm, the wooden bird felt warm, a tangible piece of a life I had briefly touched. "He'll like this." The words echoed, a riddle without context. The act of charity now felt messy, complicated. It left me not with a warm glow, but with a strange, lingering ache, a connection to a ghost. and the unsettling weight of a gift whose intended recipient I would never know. A debt had been paid, but another, more mysterious one, had just been opened. The hum of the store's lights rushed back, filling the void he left. I stood there, my own cart feeling absurdly heavy. The cashier offered a gentle, knowing smile but said nothing. The world hadn't stopped. The frantic energy of Christmas Eve simply flowed around the sacred space that had just dissolved. I paid for my things in a daze, the single intriguing detail he'd let slip, turning over in my mind. It was a question mark in the cold night air, a loose thread in a finished tapestry. I walked out not feeling like a hero, but a witness to something fragile and profound. In the weeks that followed, life resumed its rhythm. The holidays passed, a new year began, and the memory could have easily faded, buried under daily routines. Yet it didn't. Instead, it crystallized, becoming an anchor in my mind. It wasn't a story I told, but a private echo that would surface at unexpected times. When I was stuck in traffic, complaining about some trivial inconvenience or feeling self-pity, the image of his empty cart and the quiet dignity in his eyes would return. It wasn't a judgment, but a silent, powerful recalibration of my entire perspective. That recalibration subtly altered my behavior, becoming a new moral compass. I found myself holding a door open longer, leaving a bigger tip for a tired server, offering a smile instead of a sigh. These weren't life-altering gestures, just small, imperceptible shifts in my daily interactions. It was as if that single encounter unlocked a capacity for more consistent acts of grace. It's amazing how one moment can change you. If you've ever had an experience that shifted your perspective, I would genuinely love to read your story in the comments. And if this is resonating, a simple like helps more than you know. I'd be lying if I said I didn't look for him. For months, every time I returned to that supermarket, I scanned the aisles, half expecting to see him with a full cart and a smile. I'd glance at faces in the street, hoping for a flicker of recognition. But I never saw him again. There was no follow-up, no neat conclusion where I learned his life had turned around. The silence that followed our encounter was absolute. This lack of closure, which might have once felt frustrating, began to feel strangely appropriate. It preserved the purity of the moment, preventing it from becoming a transaction that needed a follow-up. His absence taught me the most profound lesson. True generosity is an act of release. You give, and then you let go completely. You let go of the need for thanks, for recognition, for knowing the outcome. The reward wasn't in picturing his children's joy. The reward was in the act itself, in the brief, powerful connection between two strangers on a cold December night. The finality was bittersweet. The sweetness of knowing I had helped mingled with the bitter reality of a world where such help is so desperately needed. He was gone, but the echo of that eve, of his quiet dignity, would remain with me forever. 6 months passed. Winter thawed into a vibrant spring, which then blazed into the heart of summer. The memory of that Christmas Eve had softened, its sharp edges worn smooth by the relentless rhythm of daily life. It was no longer a constant echo, but a quiet, foundational note in the symphony of my days, a reminder I carried, a private standard I held myself to. I found myself at a charity gala, one of those glittering affairs where philanthropy and prestige hold hands under crystal chandeliers. It was a world of tailored suits and polite laughter, a universe away from the fluorescent hum and worn linoleum of that grocery store. I was there on a work assignment, an observer in a sea of influence, feeling the familiar detachment of someone who doesn't quite belong, documenting the lives of others while my own most profound recent experience remained a silent, unresolved mystery. Then I saw him. It wasn't an immediate recognition. It was more like a glitch in the matrix, a fragment of a face in the crowd that didn't fit the pattern. He stood near the grand staircase, not soliciting help, but commanding attention. He wore a perfectly fitted tuxedo, his posture exuding a quiet confidence that was the polar opposite of the broken man I remembered. He was engaged in conversation with a senator and the CEO of a major tech firm, laughing at something one of them said. It couldn't be him. My mind refused to connect the dots. This was a doppelganger, a cruel trick of the light and a lingering memory, and yet the eyes. Beneath the veneer of wealth and status, I saw the same deep-set, weary eyes. The eyes that had held a storm of desperation that night. Driven by a force I couldn't name, a mix of disbelief and an overwhelming need for closure, I navigated the crowded ballroom. Each step felt surreal, as if I were walking through a dream. And as I got closer, the similarities became undeniable. The line of his jaw, the way he held his head slightly to one side when listening. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding in my chest. He must have sensed my stare because he excused himself from his conversation and turned his head. Our eyes met across the room, and for a breathtaking second, the entire gala fell silent. A slow smile of genuine recognition spread across his face, a smile utterly devoid of the shame I remembered. He walked towards me, extending a hand. "I was hoping I would run into you again," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I never got to properly thank you." The man I was shaking hands with was Arthur Vance, a name I instantly recognized from business journals. A reclusive tech billionaire, a philanthropist known for his unorthodox methods. In that moment, the world tilted on its axis. He led me to a quieter balcony overlooking the city lights and began to explain. He told me about a tradition he started a decade ago. After he felt he had lost touch with the world his fortune had insulated him from. Every Christmas Eve, he would leave everything behind, his wallet, his phone, his identity, and spend 24 hours on the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back. It wasn't a game, it was his anchor, a brutal, annual pilgrimage to reconnect with the reality of struggle, to feel the cold, the hunger, and the crushing weight of invisibility. It was his way of ensuring his empathy never became a theoretical concept. He explained that on that particular night, he had failed. He had miscalculated, and the reality of his self-imposed test had become too severe. He wasn't just playing a part. He was genuinely hungry, cold, and desperate. My gesture, he said, was not just a lifeline. It was a sign. In a world where he was constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from Arthur Vance, the billionaire, he had found someone who gave something to a nameless, destitute stranger, asking for nothing in return. The overwhelming gratitude I saw in his eyes that night was real, not because he couldn't afford the food, but because in his darkest, most vulnerable moment of this annual ritual, a stranger had affirmed his fading faith in humanity. The debt he felt wasn't monetary. It was a profound human debt for an act of unconditional kindness. He leaned forward slightly, the city lights behind him now a soft, distant blur. For years, he began, his voice low and steady. That night had become a confirmation of my deepest cynicism. I wasn't looking for help. I was looking for proof that in the face of desperation, humanity's default setting was indifference. I'd sit there for hours, a ghost on a park bench, watching people avert their eyes, quicken their pace, or offer a look of sterile pity before moving on. Each person who passed by hammered another nail into the coffin of my faith. I wasn't just cold from the winter air, I was frozen by a self-inflicted isolation, convinced that the fortune I'd built had become a wall, cutting me off from any genuine human connection. I went out there expecting the worst in people, and for a long time, that's exactly what I found. But then you stopped, he continued, locking his gaze with mine. And it wasn't what you did, but how you did it. There was no hesitation, no performance of charity. You looked at me, truly looked at me, not as a problem to be solved or a statistic to be pitied, but as a person. The coin you offered was incidental. The real gift was the moment of acknowledgement. In your eyes, I didn't see a rich man playing a part or a poor man needing a handout. I just saw another human being. You offered warmth, not just from your pocket, but from your presence. In that single, unadorned moment of shared humanity, you dismantled a fortress of cynicism I had spent years building. You didn't just give me a coin. You gave me back a reason to believe in the currency of kindness. His words settled in the room, heavy with the weight of their truth. That encounter changed the entire trajectory of my life's work. I went home that night and began liquidating the assets of my largest charitable foundation. It was a machine, efficient and cold, designed for tax benefits and public relations. It moved money, but it didn't transfer hope. Your simple act inspired a new thesis. True philanthropy isn't about scale, it's about connection. Now we operate in the shadows. We don't fund buildings. We pay off medical debt for families anonymously. We don't sponsor galas. We create scholarships for first-generation students delivered as a surprise inheritance from a distant relative. We replace the architecture of large-scale giving with the intimacy of the personal miracle, all because you taught me that the most powerful investment you can make is in a single human soul. I was stunned into silence, my mind reeling. The small, almost forgotten gesture I had made on a cold December night had become the fulcrum upon which a fortune had turned. It was a profound and humbling lesson in the mathematics of the human heart, where the smallest act of compassion can yield the most extraordinary returns. We are so often led to believe that changing the world requires grand plans, immense wealth, and powerful influence. But in that moment, I understood the truth. The world isn't changed by earthquakes, but by the countless unseen shifts in the soil. My coin was one of those shifts, a quiet, anonymous tremor of grace that had, against all odds, caused a seismic reordering of a man's entire purpose. He told me the coin now sits on his desk, sealed in a small glass case, a constant reminder, not of what he has, but of what he almost lost. And as I left his office and walked back out into the vibrant, chaotic pulse of the city, I saw the world differently. I saw 1,000 opportunities for connection in the faces of strangers. True wealth, I realized, is not a destination you arrive at. It's not a number in an account. It is the conscious decision in any given moment to give what you can. A coin, a moment of your time, a glance of understanding. It is the recognition that our true value is measured only by the light we reflect onto others. If this story reminded you of the power we all hold, you won't want to miss our deep dive into the silent heroes who live among us. Click the video on your screen now and be sure to subscribe for more stories that uncover the extraordinary and the ordinary.